Today we go through 6 of the creepiest stories found on the internet. Turn off your lights and strap in. We used to live in a really old part of my town. Now, when I say old, I mean 17-old. A lot of old torn-down buildings and a lot of boarded-up houses. When I was about 11, we lived in this one super old duplex, and my neighbor, Max, was to the right of us. One night, Max and myself were skipping rocks on the abandoned railroad tracks behind the local VFW. No one ever really went on the tracks, and there was a lot of trash from the homeless people who once occupied the area down the tracks. We hear yelling, like someone is in a heated argument, like super angry. Well, it starts to get dark and the yelling gets louder. Max is freaked out at this point because it's so silent outside. You would hear a needle drop, but instead, all you hear is yelling. I hear Max scream and turn to see him being pulled by his legs down the track. I race after him and scream for whatever it was pulling him to stop. I felt like my heart was gonna pop out of my chest. I jump on Max and we go rolling off the train tracks, down into the woods. Max yells to me and asks if I'm okay, and as I look at him to respond, I notice this little tent to the far right, tucked under some logs and broken down trees. Thankfully, Max has his flashlight, and we look inside. Never in my life have I seen something this gruesome. It was this shriveled body of a man, his skin hanging off, and the smell so unbearable that I begin to heave. I fall back to vomit, and this dead guy grabs my ankle and I booked it out of there. I ran so fast and didn't look back. I heard Max yelling my name and screaming. This thing was chasing us. We ran past the VFW, down the alley and into Max's yard, and into his house where we locked every door and window. We barricaded his room and cowered under his bed. Max's parents were out that night, so they weren't around for all of this. For 2 hours, this thing banged on the doors so hard, we thought the doors would give away. Eventually, we fell asleep and woke up when his parents got home. We vowed to never speak of it to anyone, ever. My folks and I were cruising the waters of Howe Sound during a weekday. We were out to catch the ever-elusive salmon, but little did we know we would get more than we bargained for. At the south end of Gambier Island, there are 3 bays. One of these is Center Bay, and at the north end of it is a wharf owned by an exclusive yacht club in Vancouver. We tied up, intending to explore the property and sleep overnight before bugging out first thing in the morning. Dad went up to check out the property, and within a few minutes I followed. I went inside the house and found it in total ruins. Heading outside to check the rear of the house, I heard 3 ape-like noises behind me. Figuring it was Dad, I told him to give it a rest. But a few minutes later, I saw Dad on the wharf, talking to Mom. Knowing something didn't add up, I wanted to quiz Dad on his whereabouts, but refrained. Later, I took a hike beyond the house and found a trail that led to a number of fruit trees in an abandoned orchard. Wondering if any fruit was on the trees, I got in among the trees. Reacting to a feeling of being watched, I turned and saw something that took 2 or 3 seconds to register. Standing about 50 to 60 yards away was a creature standing about 7 feet high and weighing several hundred pounds. It was a Sasquatch. This spooked me. We looked at each other for a few moments before the Sasquatch moved into the deeper forest. He was just interested in keeping an eye on me. After sunset, I called Dad out to the back of the boat. I had heard the same ape noises from earlier in the day on a nearby rocky slope. For several minutes, Dad and I heard Sasquatch splashing in the water, and it was having a great time in doing so. Just in case of further contact, I slept with one eye open that entire night. About 10 years ago, my family and I were up in the White Mountains of Arizona to cut down our Christmas tree. My dad was driving our truck with my grandpa in the front seat and my mom and sister in the back seat. I was in the bed of the truck along with our family's German short-haired pointer. We were driving along a forest road, and all of a sudden my dog starts barking and growling. So I looked to see what it is, thinking it is maybe a bear or mountain lion. What I saw was a tall, dark figure walking parallel to the road about 60 to 70 yards away. I yelled at my dad to stop the truck. When I told him I think I see Bigfoot, he just laughed and continued to drive. When I looked back to get another look at it, the figure had changed directions and was walking away from the road. The last thing I saw was the thing's head disappearing down a hill. To this day, I still do not have an explanation for what I saw. Every time the situation comes up, my dad always makes me tell everyone my story, just so he can laugh at it. When my husband and I were first married, we lived in a little house in a nice little subdivision. My husband worked the night shift and would leave the house about 2 a.m. one night after my husband had left. I woke up drenched in sweat and stiff with fear. I had had the most realistic dream. In my dream, I walked through the house to look out the door by the kitchen. There, sitting on the railing, were 2 sailors drinking beer. One was blonde, the other dark-haired. Seeing the blonde sailor, I became terrified. I knew I couldn't let him look at me. When I woke from this dream, I was relieved to hear my husband walking back through the house towards our bedroom. The cats who were sleeping with me also heard him and turned towards the door. At what seemed almost the same instant, I realized that the footsteps I presumed were my husband's were walking across hard floors, but our house was carpeted. I lay frozen with terror in bed until dawn. At first, I only mentioned it to my husband, but then the same thing happened to 3 different people staying at different times in our house. When it happened to my sister-in-law, the cat stood on her bed and hissed at the approaching footsteps. My sister-in-law promptly got up and drove home that night. A few years after we moved, I found out by accident that the area where our subdivision had been built had many years ago been a very bad part of town. My family has come to believe that our little house must have been built on an area where something bad had happened. A decade ago, when I was about 13, Dad got a call from a friend of his. His friend had shot a huge 8-point whitetail buck and lost it the night before in the woods. The deer was shot with a bow at sunset and ran into the woods across a road. Dad's friend called him at 8 at night and told him he'd need help finding it the next day. Dad asks if I want to learn about tracking deer. I'm all for it, because hunting is amazing, and off we go the next morning. This is out on Maryland's eastern shore. Lots of woods, lots of hills, lots of walking. I was tired and trying to retain what these 2 hunters are telling me, but still having a blast. We found a really long blood trail. The whole thing was fun for me and my dad. We'd been out there for maybe an hour or 2. I take a break near a small thing of trees that connect to the massive woods where the blood trail went. Dad's friend goes into the woods, and I'm just looking at the trees, trying to spot a white belly or part of a rack. Then I saw something perched on 4 limbs. It was hard to see it, and it's been about a decade since, but I saw what looked like a fox with a short muzzle, no tail, and really long limbs. Like deer length, deer thin limbs. It's just standing there, maybe 20 yards from me. I can't tell what it is or what color. I just know it's strange looking and it's not moving. That's not the weird part. That thing kinda just loped away, like those cat videos where the cat is scared, lifts its front feet off the ground, and runs off on its back legs. Like that, only it held its front legs higher, and it ran like that was the way it had run its entire life. Like that was natural for it to do, hunched and hurried, but not wobbly. I only saw it for a few seconds. Dad scared the shit out of me by shouting about the 8-pointer being found. I told Dad I saw a weird animal. He said it may have been a fox. I told him about the legs being weird and long. He gave me the look that says stop making shit up. I got that look a lot. Well, I learned how to gut, drag, and track a deer that day. We took a trip to the butcher. I got to watch them begin processing, and that was that. As for what I saw, I've always had a big imagination. I could have just been sleep deprived, because 6 a.m. on a Saturday at 13 years old is bullshit. Maybe it was just a fox that moved weird. Maybe it was a deer with a messed up head. I don't know. I only saw it for a few seconds. But what I do know is that deer and foxes don't run on their back legs. My friend works at a movie theater, and supposedly a worker died in one of the theaters by falling down some stairs. My friend was cleaning, and out of nowhere a shadow runs across the screen. Then he saw the shadow continuing up the stairs to the door. He was freaked out. When he was cleaning after closing, the elevator door opened and then it shut by itself and went back up. It came back down again. The door opens and an empty trash can is in the elevator. The door goes back up. The door comes back down and it opens and it is full of smoke. It closes and goes back up. So they send 6 people up, 3 on one stairwell and 3 on the other, so that way the person would be trapped. Turns out no one was on the floor at all. How did all that stuff happen? Well, this trash can isn't done. Later that night, someone was counting the money, and they were all by themselves, and out of nowhere a trash can comes rolling by. No one else was on that floor. No one could get on the floor. A week later, the guy is in the vault and no one is in the building, and he hears a knocking at the vault. He goes to check. No one is there at all. He runs out of the building. The next day the popcorn thing goes off by itself.